Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Marie Hadley. In this video, I'll be talking to you about a technique I use and that I teach my students about for improving your essays in the context of strengthening your structure, making sure your argument is at the foreground of your response throughout, and then making sure your analysis of the evidence you use to sustain that argument is well constructed and is really just coherent and cohesive from start to finish. Okay, so what is this technique that I use? I call it visualizing your essay, but you might also want to throw out terms like mind mapping your essay or reducing to some type of flowchart your essay. Now, if you have a look on the slide here, you get a sense or start to get a sense of what I might mean by visualizing an essay. At the top of the diagram, we have our thesis. Our thesis is our direct response to the question that's been put to you. If the question for example, says, should this doctrine be abolished? Okay, your thesis is a yes, a no, or a maybe in these circumstances. Okay, it's your direct response to the question. So when thinking about what your thesis is, literally think about what you would respond to someone who asked you, do you think this doctrine should be abolished? Or whatever it is your question actually is. How would you respond to them in a sentence? That one sentence is your thesis. All right, so that goes up the top of our diagram. Everything that follows in your essay needs to go towards proving that thesis. Okay, so that thesis sits above everything. All right, now the next layer we have our sub-arguments or our sub-points. I like to describe this to my students as the stepping stones along the way to proving your thesis. What is it you need to prove? What is it you need to show to be able to go from the start to the finish, where your thesis, that conclusion that you come to, is well justified and well supported? What are the things? What are the points you need to make along the way? Those things, those stepping stones, belong on that next level. Now, those things, those stepping stones, need to tie back to your thesis. So you can see I've got the connections there. How many points you have will vary in your essay, will change depending on its length and how broadly or narrowly you approach the question. So the number of subpoints is not so important, but what is important is those subpoints are the things you have to prove, the things you have to show to be able to sustain that overarching position. Now, right down the bottom, we have our evidence. Now, our evidence is the things that you analyze. It's your research, it's your journal articles, it's your cases, okay? Now, when thinking about what evidence is most helpful, obviously it needs to be framed within the context of this sub-point or this sub-argument that you're making. And you may like to, have some nuanced analysis where you look at, critiques of this particular limitation, but you also look at people who respond to those critiques. So it doesn't necessarily confine you to only selecting the evidence which directly supports your point. You can consider arguments and counter arguments of other scholars, but all of that information is framed within the context of your sub-argument, that thing that you have to show to be able to sustain your thesis up the top, right? Okay, so it's not enough that you've simply got a case example. It's not enough that you simply summarize a journal article or a commentator's key argument or position. You need to be drawing out the significance of your evidence for your point, and then that point for your thesis. So along the way, you want to be literally saying, okay, and then in the case, this aspect of the judgment says X, Y, Z, and this is significant because, or this is persuasive because, okay? So you need to be drawing out those links so you're making it super clear why that evidence supports your sub-argument, all right? So what you have then with this picture of what your essay potentially looks like is a strong thesis which sits above everything. Then you have, your stepping stones along the way that sustain your conclusion, and you have evidence that is being systematically tied back to the point that you're trying to make, which then sustains your thesis. So it's not enough that you have a thesis, sub-arguments, and evidence. Everything has its role, everything has its place, and everything ties back to the thing before it. So this is how you can build a strong essay. This is how you can build a cohesive response to the question, okay? Now, I talk about this as a technique, right, for improving your essay writing. You might use it to plan your essay, but I actually think it's potentially most helpful in teaching you how to be objective about your own work, teaching you how to, get that additional insight around what's working for you, what's not, how you can improve what you've got. Because generally when people are essay writing for the first time or they're building their skills in this area, they're really good at the content and really good at knowing that case X relates to this topic, or that this journal article, relates to a limitation on this topic, or whatever it is. They're okay at the evidence, but it's the structure and the progression of the argument within and across sections and tying that analysis back closely that's missing. So what I would advise, or what I would suggest, is after you have your first draft, you then read back through your paper, maybe have a little break first so you get a little bit of objectivity. Then read back through your paper and along the way, think to yourself, okay, what is my thesis? What are my sub-arguments? Does this evidence actually sustain the sub-argument that I'm looking to make? And am I drawing out the connections? Am I making it clear what the significance of this evidence is for this argument that I'm trying to make? And if you can reduce your whole paper to a diagram like this, I think it'll become, hopefully, more obvious to you about what you need to do to strengthen everything so it really comes together as a whole piece. Hopefully that's helpful. You can always let me know how you go in the comments or by sending me an email through my university email address.